that longing for something that's magical or larger than ordinary life. And that's what's always excited me about supernatural stories is they're kind of more, they're just more exciting.
There are tales of rogues and whores, of stratagems and wars. There's a tale for every season of the year. There are tales of knights and queens, of drudgery and dreams. There's a tale for everybody here. There are stories galore, in volumes by the score, on every subject throughout history. It's all waiting in Pandora's library.
Welcome to April's episode of Pandora's Library, a monthly podcast about books that feature the mysterious, fantastical, dark, and creepy elements of life. My name is Karen Hamilton-Vile, a paranormal murder mystery author of a series of books about Ada Baker, a medium who solves murders with the aid of the ghost she lives with. This month, I'm interviewing screenwriter and author Stephen Volk, who's probably best known as the BAFTA-winning writer of the 1992 BBC TV Halloween hoax, Ghostwatch, starring Michael Parkinson and Sarah Green, which spooked the nation. He was creator and lead writer of ITV's award-winning paranormal drama series Afterlife, starring Lesley Sharp and Andrew Lincoln. He co-wrote The Awakening, a period ghost hunter story starring Rebecca Hall, Dominic West and Imelda Staunton, and adapted Phil Rickman's best-selling supernatural crime novel, Midwinter of the Spirit, as a 3-part miniseries for ITV, starring Anna Maxwell Martin and David Threlfall. His first produced screenplay was Ken Russell's Gothic, a trippy telling of the Frankenstein origin story starring Gabriel Byrne, Julian Sands and Natasha Richardson. His fiction has won awards and includes novels and novellas such as Vardoa, Leytonstone and Neverwood. His most acclaimed fiction to date is the novella Whitstable, featuring the late horror star Peter Cushing. His latest novella, released last November, is The Confirmed Bachelors. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Hello, nice to be here.
There were so many achievements you had that I couldn't list them all. There's so many in your CV, but I hope that gives listeners a good flavour of who you are.
Yeah, I don't know what that flavour is. Probably something you want to have a rinse out your mouth after. But
and how long have you been writing? Did you always want to be a writer?
Well, I suppose it's kind of I don't think any writer is very similar to any other writer in terms of how they got to the position of doing it for a living, if you can call it doing it for a living. I kind of started, I think, in school. I was more interested in art than I was in writing. I was always kind of drawing. And at a young age, I think everyone presumed that would be where I would go in the visual arts. And even though I got into reading, and especially reading genre stuff in my teenage years, I went to art school. And I studied graphic design with the idea of being a designer or a book cover artist, that kind of thing. But I got kind of sidetracked into the film department and made animation films. And from that, I went to the postgraduate degree in Bristol University Drama Department doing radio, film and TV. So it's all a bit haphazard. And I came out of there and, not knowing what to do next, I got a job in advertising as a copywriter and, basically burnt the midnight oil writing my own stuff in the meantime.
I love that. I mean, I went to art college first. I wish I'd known that you could do writing degrees, but I didn't at the time.
I don't think that when I was certainly being an old kid, there weren't any creative writing degrees when I was around anyway. Not that I wouldn't have really had the balls to do one. I don't think, because I didn't think, I wasn't very prepossessing or confident, creative, as they now say. So I don't know. I don't think I would have gone for it, even though it was my kind of hobby in those days. So I thought art would be my profession, and writing is just something I was interested in at the side.
I think that's important for young people to remember as well, isn't it? That, just because that's what you've done your degree in, you're not stuck with doing that for the whole life if you change your mind.
Yeah, especially these days. I mean, you've got to be very malleable and adaptable to, I wouldn't even say the market, but I would think just in terms of your self-worth, just, you need to figure yourself out about what you want to spend your life doing. That's what I keep telling my grandson anyway.
Yeah, do what you love.
Yeah, absolutely. If you can turn your hobby into what you do for a living all day, every day, then that's a win, I think.
You kindly gave me a copy of your latest novella, The Confirmed Bachelors. Can you describe to the listeners what the book is about, please?
Yes, I wrote the story of the Confirmed Bachelors, and it's about a couple of old farts basically investigating a haunted bedroom in the 1920s. And for some reason, I didn't want to send it to the usual kind of short story markets. I kind of wanted it to sit on its own, so I kind of wanted it as a chapbook. And I contacted a friend of mine, Steve Shaw at Black Shuck Books, and he was very keen on publishing it. But he because I previously published another story about kind of a ghost hunter called The Waiting Room, he said, why don't I reprint that and we can have kind of a little book of basically two stories. And I said, well, I'll write an introduction since they're both about ghost hunting. I'll write a little introduction about why ghost hunting is really common in the stories I write, both for the screen and, on the page. So that's the book comprising those three things.
And can you read us a short snippet from one of the stories?
Yes, I will. I'll read it from the Confirmed Bachelors itself. I'll read about a page, if I may. So it begins with, this is Mrs. Willett, who is the owner of the house, talking. The bed must have come from elsewhere. Somebody took a liking to it. One of the old vicars, I presume. I never did. All that dark wood absorbing the light, making the room gloomy. Oak, said Flaxton. Any rate, it was too big to get down the stairs without taking it apart. I wouldn't have minded that. Might have made good firewood. The man joked it came with the property, like the rodents. Scratch, scratch. Lizzie May flexed her fingers and wrinkled her nose. Yes, which reminds me, mind the traps, warned her mother. I don't mind them, said Lizzie May. Brave girl, said Flaxton. Mice don't hurt you. Flaxton got the distinct impression she might have meant other things did. Pomeroy tested the mattress. Comfortable? When I used to sleep in it, before things started. It always strikes me how people were much shorter in those days. Didn't they used to dress up and go to bed also? Probably. Teeth are chatter, said Flaxton. A devil to find a way to keep oneself warm. I mean, he didn't know what he did mean in truth, or why the back of his head had become hot. It was a dashed nuisance. How many people have died in beds? Pomeroy folded back the top blanket in one corner. Yet so few are haunted. The linen's clean. You keep an immaculate home. As I said, Mrs. Reddy is a godsend. Ah, whilst I think of it, would you do the honours? Pomeroy dashed over to his brownie. He had already taken the roll of film out of the foil packet and loaded it onto the spool. It was just a case of winding it on. He positioned Mrs. Willett behind the camera, facing the bed. Turn the knob clockwise until you see the next number in the window, then click the little silver lever down. Just here, look. Pomeroy leapt onto the bed, fully clothed, dragging the top blanket over his midriff. Come along, Flaxton, shake a leg, old man. All right, gracious me, what a nag you are. Flaxton climbed in beside him, the two of them sitting up in their finery, pinstriped suit, camel coat, waistcoats with a strain on the buttons, stiff collars, staring at the camera lens.
Fantastic, thank you. So the first story, The Waiting Room, is about Charles Dickens. And I mean, I think the only thing that I've read, and probably a lot of other people, by Dickens is A Christmas Carol. But your writing in the story is in a 19th century style, so using words and phrases from the time. And I thought it gave a wonderful sense of authenticity to the story, and it drew me into the setting. So how long did you spend researching this style? And are you a big fan of 19th century literature?
I didn't really research it for this story. It's just something I enjoy, that period. I've done I was going to say a lot of pastiches. I don't really think it's pastiche, because pastiche for me implies that you want a kind of humorous effect. So it's not that. I would say it's more a kind of imitation of that period. I've always loved since I first read them, the Sherlock Holmes stories and the kind of supernatural stories that were written by Conan Doyle and writers of that kind of so-called golden era of supernatural and ghost stories. I just find it very, very kind of refreshing to go to that period. To be honest, it's enjoyable because it gets me out of the modern idiom. I mean, it gets, especially for supernatural fiction, it gets away from smartphones. It gets me away from computers, which are the bane of your life if you're writing modern drama. And I just simply kind of like that as a way to mirror things that are in life and society at the moment. It somehow you can use the past, I think, rather than just to be a kind of fancy way of showing off the costumes, as a lot of period drama, say, on TV does, unless it really holds up some kind of mirror to the way people behave or says something different about the way we are. It's a bit kind of moribund. So I like to kind of use it as a prism to talk about certain issues and characters.
Do you think it's an era you would have liked to have lived in?
No. I always think people say that they want to live in it because they want to be more well off than they are now. There's a friend of mine who was absolutely obsessed by the Regency period, and would like to have been Beau Brummel or that kind of thing, but he probably wouldn't have wanted to be one of those poor sods carrying a kind of sedan chair up the hill in Bath.
Which would have been most of us, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So the first story, The Waiting Room, is based on a true ghostly experience of Dickens. How much of his original experience is in the book and how much is invented?
I started the story. I would say the bulk of maybe the first half of the story is more or less what I read. When I came across this idea that Dickens had written the story and then someone, putting it crudely, came up to him, tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Hey, that was my story. That happened to me." I thought that was so intriguing, especially since it was a kind of ghost story. Stephen King has written the story about someone turning up at his front door saying, "You stole my idea." But this was even kind of, this being true was, I think, even better. And I've just thought it's remarkable that nobody's picked up on the fact that the person that wrote A Christmas Carol, and not forgetting The Signal Man, which is an absolutely wonderful story that you should definitely read. It's a brilliant bit of television adaptation with Denham Elliott, one of the ghost stories for Christmas, but also the actual story itself is a wonderful read. And it was just sitting there to be done something with. So I kind of took it up, really. And it was an opportunity for me to, in a way, give Dickens as a character this mystery that he had to figure out, and then take him into becoming a kind of erstwhile ghost hunter for that moment, which I thought I wasn't completely offensive in doing, since he was one of the prime members of the Ghost Club, so it wasn't like he was disinterested in ghosts. And in fact, there was an exhibition, a pretty good exhibition at the British Library, which is about Dickens and the supernatural, so it was definitely a theme that was sitting there. All I did was kind of dramatize it by putting him in one, really.
In the second story, The Confirmed Bachelors, the two lead characters are Flaxton, a member of the SPR, which is the Society for Psychical Research, and Pomeroy, a famed attention-seeking ghost hunter. So the two characters are at opposite ends of the ghost investigation spectrum. Are they inspired by real people?
Well, the story was inspired by a real case, and I'll tell you what it was. I kind of kept this under wraps in a way because I wanted people to read the story as it was, but it was inspired by quite a well-known photograph of two ghost hunters sitting in a haunted bed. One of them was Harry Price, and the other one was, I think his name was Jode. So there's a photograph of this very ornate 16th century bed with these two men sitting up in bed, rather like the scene I just read out to you. And I just saw this photograph and I thought, it was like Laurel and Hardy sitting up in bed. And I just thought, what? They're going to stay there all night, sat there. What would they be saying to each other about this haunted room, So that's what got the ball rolling in my mind about these two characters. But I hasten to say, I didn't research either Harry Price, although I knew a little bit about him, or the other person, because I wanted to have fictional characters that I'd made up. So even though the photograph was the inspiration, I kind of went off-piste in terms of the two characters. Obviously, it developed in quite a logical way in that I wanted them to be kind of opposites. And I kind of went, I went down that route, that one was very academic, the other one was a bit more of a maverick and that kind of thing, and how their characters bounced off each other. And then kind of delved into their emotional lives a little bit. And that became the essence of what the story was, really, in the end.
I love Harry Price. The famous or infamous Borley Rectory is only about 10 miles from where I am here.
Oh, yeah.
Quite exciting. I didn't realise for the first sort of 15 years I lived here, and so of course I had to go along and have a look.
It doesn't
not much
exist.
left there. No,
I was going to say it doesn't exist anymore, does it? Unfortunately.
The church is lovely, but yeah, not a lot else to see.
Wow.
I first saw you speaking at the ASAP conference, which, for anybody that doesn't know, is the Association for the Scientific Study of Anomalous Phenomena. Bit of a mouthful. So it's a society similar to the SPR, which your character Flaxton belongs to. Do you belong to any paranormal investigation societies yourself?
I used to belong to the SPR, and when I lived in London, I used to go to the talks that were down in, I think, South Kensington or somewhere around there, and met a lot of the people that were lecturers and involved in it and that kind of thing. And it kind of opened my door to being interested, or rather kind of researching in my mind the paranormal from the point of view of what actually happens to people and what is reported as actual cases. A lot of people that write horror and the supernatural, I don't think they're that interested in what actually has happened to people. I mean, maybe they are in terms of the famous cases, but I think it sometimes enables you to get under the skin of the psychology of people that are involved in these things, and also the psychology of people that investigate these things. And that became increasingly fascinating to me. What makes someone want to get involved in it, and the kind of almost essential contradiction of someone getting involved in it and yet having a skeptical viewpoint. So you've got a skeptical viewpoint, and yet you want to spend a lot of time investigating something that you're skeptical about. There seems almost a disconnect there that I find quite fascinating. So you're drawn to it, and yet you want to disprove it, or not want to disprove it, but and then there's the whole Harry Houdini thing that, spiritualists would always say to Harry Houdini, but you really want to believe that's what's underneath all this. And he was like, no, I don't. I think what you're doing is obscene. You bring back my mother and she talks perfect English. She never did in life. So, what's going on here? He was offended by what they did, So that the mixture of all those emotions, I think, is a great prison through which to examine human beliefs and expectations and desires, really. I've just always been interested in that whole area.
I know what you mean. So I suppose a modern example would be Kieran on Uncanny. He's just the total skeptic, but it's just so deeply entrenched in that world, even though he doesn't believe in them. But yeah, I find that interesting too.
But Kieran is also quite a fan of ghost stories. I mean, he and I have talked a few times, and the nice thing is he does acknowledge the why people are attracted to them in fiction. I think that's kind of part of the science as well. Is why are people drawn to talk about it and tell stories, and and then also tell stories that say this really happened to me, And what's the difference between this really happened to me and a piece of fiction that invariably begins by saying, you're not going to believe this, but this really happened to me? It's a kind of grey area.
Speaking of which, have you ever had any paranormal experiences yourself?
I always say that my nearest thing to a paranormal experience was finding a spoon in the top floor of the house in our bedroom. And this happened repeatedly, just finding a spoon from the kitchen in the bedroom. And we never ever take any drinks to the top floor or in the bedroom, any drinks or food. Never. It just doesn't happen. And yet we kept finding this spoon. And then I realized one day, as I was spooning out the cat food into the bowl for the cat obviously has a little metal magnet around its neck. So the cat obviously would, the spoon would stick to the magnet and the cat would go upstairs and take the spoon with it. So that was the explanation. And it's incredibly banal, but when you've got literally no way to account for something as incongruous, and you know nobody has physically taken it. There's only two of us in the house, and it was a delightfully banal explanation in the end. So that's the one I always tell.
So would you like to have a paranormal experience, do you think?
I think I'm too much of a. No, I can't really say I'm too much of a rationalist, because I'm not really. I'm a kind of mixture of the two characters in Afterlife. That's what I always tell people, which is there's part of me like Alison that's got a vivid imagination and sees a spook, at the end of the room or in the corner over my shoulder. But I'm also Robert, who wants to organize all the information and put it in a book and then close the cover, and is quite rational about it. So I like to think I'm a rational animal, but I know in the middle of the night when it's dark and there's a noise downstairs, I'm not that rational.
So where does your fascination with writing about ghosts and horror stem from?
I think it's quite different from whether I personally believe in ghosts. So let's put that to one side, because people tend to think if you write about ghosts, you've got to kind of believe in them. But I think it's more of a kind of impulse to use ghosts as a kind of as something symbolic in a story that actually, I think, kind of amplifies the human frailties and dilemmas in the story. A ghost can symbolize lots of things, like it can be about revenge, it can be about the past, it can be about tragedy. Grief, obviously, is a biggie. So I like using ghosts in that kind of way. But I dug this out because it's very good throat, I think, for why people are drawn to the world of the supernatural to use in fiction. And this was from something in The Guardian. It says, to use the philosopher Charles Taylor's term, we all inhabit the constraints and reassurances of the buffered self. We take the world to be reliably disenchanted. We take there to be a secure line between our interior self and everything else, which can't be transgressed by ghouls, demons, fairies, visions, spirits, malign or benevolent powers. This keeps us safe, but it also cuts off or cuts down to size the unruly and imaginative in us. It makes us long untidily for the enchantment it excludes. It makes us want the magical to be allowed to billow out sometimes. And I think it's that longing for something that's magical or larger than ordinary life. And that's what's always excited me about supernatural stories, is they're kind of more, they're just more exciting in terms of ideas than realism.
I always love putting the paranormal in the world that we live in, so people feel it can
absolutely
be something that does exist under the surface. They just
that's
might not
the trick,
see it.
isn't it? I always say that's kind of not being condescending, but that's the game to me, is for the length of the story or the story you're watching or reading, you believe what's going on. It kind of doesn't matter if you realize in an hour's time, oh, that's unbelievable. The whole game is to make something unplausible or impossible seem plausible in the context of the story. That's what's really enjoyable to me as a writer.
I think there aren't many writers who could wholeheartedly be called a wordsmith, but reading your stories, I felt that was a perfect description for you, because there were certain words and phrases where I thought, oh, that's such a perfect way to describe it. And you often convey information about a character in just one short sentence. So to quote an example, if I may.
Go ahead.
Mrs. Reddy saw a ghost once, piped up Lizzie May. whose potato and mince had been separated on the plate from her green beans by a dictatorial fork. So I love that description. It conveys sort of clearly in my mind an image of Lizzie May as sort of despot of her plate, ordering which food should go where, and also an astute observation of children, how they behave, and also that she was interested in the paranormal, just in one sentence. So, and both stories were full of careful observances such as this, and I honestly enjoyed your word usage as much as I did the plot and the characters. So, is this a gift you've always had, or how long has it taken you to develop your writing style?
Oh my God. I don't think, I don't really think I have a style, but I also think, yeah, if you're really serious about what you do, you're always developing it. I don't think a good writer sits on their laurels and thinks, oh, I've got my style. This is kind of easy. I think you're dead if you start to think this is easy. You've got to kind of test it and test yourself in how you express things, really. And it's to do with balancing a lot of the time specificity or clarity and ambiguity, especially in our kind of stories that we're trying to imply things or that kind of thing. So that's the kind of flavors or the flavors that we have at our disposal, really. As for that thing about separating the things on the plate, just to be specific about that, what I was thinking is about, I read that certain autistic people like to separate colors on the plate. And the reason I like to put it there was, it's a bit of information about her being slightly autistic to the modern eye, except the people that are investigating everything that goes on in the house, it completely goes over their heads. They don't notice it. So it's a little, maybe nobody will notice this observation, but the idea was, here's something that a modern psychologist would immediately see as a piece of information, but the two guys in the story are completely blind to it. That was my thought. And it doesn't really matter if no one gets it. I kind of, I know it's there for, to be seen.
Little Easter egg for people to find, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did that. And I wrote a short story this week, and it's about witchcraft, and the cow stops producing milk. Yeah. And I said that the woman had given the cow buttercups, which happened to be something that stopped cows producing milk. But of course, in the 17th century, they thought it was witchcraft. But I like the fact that there was a scientific explanation behind it that nobody would know unless they knew about herbalism, I suppose.
Yeah.
It's fun hiding little things like that, isn't it?
But also I like the idea that you can use a character in the story, but implied that they have a life when the story stops. In other words, what happened to her after the story, we don't know, we're not told. But if you've created a decent character, the reader can always play that game if they wish to, about what that character might become, kind of thing.
I love doing that. My husband likes to know everything, every I dotted T cross, but I love doing that myself.
Difficult reader, my gosh.
In a twist on Desert Island Discs, if you were trapped in a spooky castle somewhere, what favourite books are you taking with you to entertain yourself?
You know what? I was thinking about this a lot, and when you implied that you're going to ask that question, and I thought, I don't really have a book. I don't reread books. I can't remember rereading any book ever. There's so much that I haven't read that, I could take something like, that's a real doorstop, like The Lord of the Rings or something, which I've never read. But to be honest, there's so much that I would like to read for the first time. I'd be terrified of being disappointed, though, and being saddled on this island with a book that I don't think is great. I'd probably, I haven't read much Dickens. I haven't read, so there's, probably all the Dickens, or if I was being a bit more highfalutin, the Russian novelists, or Crime and Punishment, and those kind of the classics of literature, which I've never got round to reading. Probably it would be a massive guilt trip if I had to take all the ones that I should have read, but I haven't, because I never studied, as I told you, I never did English I never did an English degree, so my reading has notable. I've never read Jane Austen, There are massive gaps in my education, but so sometimes if someone asks me for, as they did once, to adapt Brave New World, I have to go away and read it for the first time, as an adult, because I never read it when I was growing up. That never happened, but that's a fantastic book. And also, it's quite recently did I read 1984, which I thought was fantastic. There are lots of lots of gaps in my knowledge, so I'd probably tentatively rather take something new than a favorite.
Is there anything on your to be read list at the moment?
I've got a book called Embers. I can't remember the author, but someone recommended it to me. It's a kind of, I think, a supernatural tale. Got lots of awards. And we're reading a novella called Train Dreams, because I like that film very much, and I'm kind of intrigued as to how it worked as a novella.
And as a successful screenwriter, do you have any recommendations for any writers listening who are looking to start a career in screenwriting?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to not follow fashion, because by the time you do something that you think is fashionable, because you see, I don't know, let's say you see Sinners and you think, oh, it'd be fashionable for me to do a vampire story. That's probably a bad example because vampires are always fashionable. But anyway, even though the Guardian always thinks that they come and go, they don't actually. There's always been vampire stories. By the time you get round to writing yours and getting it round, then the cycle has moved on and people are looking for something else. So people are always looking for something other than what you're writing. The trick is, in a way, timing, but you can't anticipate that timing. So you're better off to spend your time, rather than what do they want, think, what do you want to write about? And it sounds very simplistic, but that's the best advice, is to kind of listen to your heart, so to speak, have real faith in the kind of why you want to write it as well. That's going to get you to the end at the end on the last page. Because if you start to read something that you're not committed to, you'll fizzle out of enthusiasm, and it'll just show in the writing, I think.
Every writer dreams of turning their novel into a TV show. Is this an impossible dream, or can a novelist adapt their own book for TV? Or is it something that only a skilled screenwriter can do?
In terms of a novelist writing the screenplay, I think that usually happens when the novelist has some kudos and can call the shots in terms of contract. I hate to be kind of blunt about it, but if someone, I think of Gone Girl, Gillian Flynn and Gone Girl, I just, for some reason, came into my mind there, and I think she wrote the screenplay simply because it was a massive bestseller, and she probably said, well, I want to do it. That's the deal. Not many people have that kind of weight. So I've got mixed feelings on it, really. In some respects, I think a writer is a writer, especially if they're imaginative. The difference between writing a screenplay and writing a novel will become apparent if you're a good writer, I think, really. But then again, I do think you get skill from doing it. So in other words, by doing it repetitively, you build up your skill set in terms of how to express yourself, either in novel form or in screenplay form. So sometimes it's the wisest thing a novelist can do to hand it over to someone, or just say, I've got my book, listen, it's on the shelf, that's mine. You guys in Hollywood, get on with it. And I'll see you in 5 years' time when it's gone through all that horrendous development hell, But some novelists are genuinely interested in screenwriting and seeing something that they've written come together on the screen. You need a lot of resilience to get through the process. That's the difference. So it's not always the case that a novelist and a screenwriter have the same aptitude or character traits. I think writing a screenplay is very collaborative in that you've got to listen to everyone, including the cleaning lady, their opinion about what you've done. A novelist is more able to shut the door and just let everyone, including their closest family, they've got to stay on the other side of the door for the 6 months that it takes to write a book. Some writers are in the middle of that kind of those two polarities, but it's probably about knowing your own capacity to adapt from one to the other.
So how does somebody just starting out as a writer decide which path to follow? I mean, is it hard to achieve both as you have done?
It probably would be, I would say, if you've written a novel and you think could make a film, you could. I would probably. The reason I'm fumbling is that I just rejected my own advice. My advice was going to be write a screenplay based on the novel that you just wrote. But then I could hear my agent say, no, don't bother wasting your time doing that, because if it's any good, we'll just sell the novel. So, so in a way, you have to volunteer your services to adapt your own work in a way to try and get on a rung of the ladder. And then, and hopefully you're with people that would encourage you to, go on the, stay on the ride, so to speak.
And what's been the most mundane situation where you've found inspiration?
Let me think. I can think of something specific. I don't know whether it's mundane, but do you remember Robert Maxwell? I don't know, Ghislaine Maxwell's father was, he kind of spent the funds of the, if I can remember correctly, the union pension scheme. He basically spent the money. And I was thinking about his two sons, what it was, for some reason, what was it like growing up with someone that was, I wouldn't say criminal, but let's just say a liar, okay? They're a liar. How are these boys growing up with him as a role model? And for some reason, into my mind came an incident from my childhood where I remember my dad driving along and he came to a T-junction and the car was coming from the right, if you can imagine, and its indicator was going, so it was going to pull in. So my father pulled out and it went straight on rather than turning left. So there was an impact. And I remember my dad getting out of the car and saying to the guy, your indicator was on. And the guy saying, no, it wasn't. And my dad said, it was. We saw your indicator on. And in my mind, I can't remember when this happened, but in my mind, my dad turned around to me, who was sitting in the car, and said, well, ask the little boy in the back there, was the indicator on? And I say, yes, it was, to please him, you see. And I thought, yeah, that's the first lie that I tell to please my dad. And I thought, this idea of telling a lie to please your dad. And anyway, that became a story, which I called Indicator. And it's about an indicator of kids that grow up to lie. So that was just how you're thinking about something, and a little incident from the past kind of starts to be integral in the little story that you tell.
My mind's always wandering off creating stories in everyday situations.
Oh yeah, well, of course that's what being a writer is. Yeah, absolutely.
So, as I mentioned earlier, you're best known perhaps for Ghostwatch, which was shown on British TV back in 1992. So for anybody that was too young to remember or wasn't watching at the time, it was presented as if it was a live broadcast from a haunted house with well-known presenters such as Sarah Green and Michael Parkinson. And the suspense increased as we moved through the show, and the story of Pipes, the poltergeist, was revealed, leading to scary consequences for Sarah. So I was 18 at the time and wholeheartedly believed that this was really happening, which probably sounds tremendously gullible to younger listeners, which I think it's important for them to know that this is really before most people had PCs, there were no phones, internet wasn't really a thing at the time. So the world was, I suppose, a smaller place. You couldn't just go off and look things up like you do now. And the closest thing to it was perhaps when War of the Worlds was broadcast over the radio in 1938, as if it was really happening. And I partly believed it because I trusted those presenters, such as Sarah Green, and it contained recorded paranormal footage of events that had happened to a family in a very ordinary house, and featured advice from experts. The public could even call in with their own experiences and what they'd seen. So it was very convincing. And my mum had to reassure me that it wasn't real at the time. But the following year, I had my own real life ghost experience, and many of the happenings in the show suddenly became very relatable to me. So I think that both these experiences were formative in shaping me as a person and my writing. Has anyone ever told you that they were inspired in their own writing by Ghostwatch or anything else that you've written?
Well, yes. Thanks for telling me that. That's very well. I say what I always say when people say similar things, which is thanks very much and sorry. And I'm not sure. Oh, sorry and thank you very much. It has actually happened, especially on Ghostwatch. When the internet came about and it was Ghostwatch was re-released on DVD in 2002, and people up and down the country, universities or film clubs, started to have screenings of it. I'd meet people at these screenings, and invariably there'd be someone that came and would say to me, it was so terrifying. I slept, I couldn't sleep for a week, or I slept with the light on for the next month. But they would quite often, and this is no exaggeration, quite often say, but it made me interested in horror, and it made me want to make my own horror films. And this happened quite a few times, and was very, very, I think, the most gratifying aspect of Ghostwatch in terms of in hindsight. The guys, I don't know if you've seen a film called Host, which was a kind of Zoom ghost story that was made over COVID, and it was all done in the shape of a Zoom meeting. Very, very good. Rob Savage directed it with Jed Shepard co-wrote it and produced it, and they both. I've met them both, and they said they were very inspired by Ghostwatch, and the League of Gentlemen guys. Reece Shearsmith was very hugely inspired by it when they did their Halloween live special. I think it was called Deadline. I think, I can't remember. But no, it's really, really, really gratifying that it's kind of strange that that kind of terror can also inspire people to want to kind of not confront it exactly. Stephen King always says that horror exorcises terror, doesn't exorcise it. I think that's quite interesting. So it doesn't really get rid of it, but you use it to, I think, explore your feelings about it.
So Ghostwatch received 30,000 complaints when it was initially broadcast in the 1990s. And that probably would have fazed a lot of writers. How did this affect you? So how can writers take a positive attitude about such situations and apply it to their own work?
Well, it was kind of a mixed feeling, because I had to sift between people that were genuinely scared by what they'd experienced and believed it, to people that were turned that into a kind of outrage and kind of shook their face in a sort of this shouldn't be allowed, heads must roll kind of way, and they kind of blamed the BBC for kind of fooling them, as if the main thing was to trick people. It didn't really occur to me, or I didn't really see it in the way that we were kind of pranking people. That wasn't the purpose of it. The purpose was actually almost the exact opposite, which was to question our sense of trust in who we believe in terms of broadcasting, who we believe in terms of people giving us information. Even how do we even believe our eyes when we're shown something that is not actually true? So it was trying to explore and ask questions about those kind of things. It wasn't, it, you know, so I wish that kind of aspect of it had been analysed a bit more at the time. But it was, really, I had kind of mixed feelings, because when you're a horror writer, which I kind of, I'm kind of unashamedly call myself in a way, because there's not much alternative. You want to scare people. So if something's really scared people, there's an element that says, well, job done. I've achieved that. But I don't think serious kind of trauma is, really what you want to do to people. I, what I find really interesting is, as I say, meeting fans and meeting people that were really affected by it, and say, people have said to me, I think it's the best thing the BBC have ever done, which is a big thing to say, but I believe they meant it. But I'm interested in this idea that people then can be traumatized by something and then flip it into something positive, flip it into something that becomes art or literature, or their own, can filter it through their own experience into being something positive. And I think that goes for, Edgar Allan Poe. It goes for Stephen King. There was a wonderful essay that I read ages ago, and I'm forever quoting it. And I remember it was called The Terror Stories of the Formerly Terrified. So I think the title tells you everything, is that terrified people go on to create terrifying stories. And the woman whose name I can't remember, who wrote this article, said that Edgar Allan Poe, saw his mother coughing blood on the stage when he was 2 years old. Subsequently, his wife suffered from the same consumption and died. He went through terrible tragedy, hence the Mask of the Red Death, and, all his stories are incredibly symbolic of trauma. Stephen King similarly experienced finding a body that had been hit by a train. And a lot of that experience can be traced through quite a few of his stories. Hitchcock was locked up in a police station, as we know. So she was making a catalogue of the correlation between writers that had experienced terror and wanting to create terror as a way of kind of controlling their experience and emotion about it, which I find quite interesting.
Yeah. So Ghostwatch has something of a almost cult following these days. It seemed to take a while for people to realise the genius of it, I think. How does it feel to have written something that's so embedded in the national psyche that decades later people still recall the feeling of cold, chilling terror that they felt during the last few minutes of the show? I mean, my brother was talking about it with his friends only the other week when, he didn't even know I was going to be talking to you, so...
Oh God, that's amazing. It's a shock, to be honest, Karen. 30 odd years later, something that was only an hour and a half. It wasn't a long series or anything. And then it was kind of buried and not talked about for 10 years. And yet it's kind of remembered. It's quite kind of remarkable in a way. So I'm very proud of it. And I'm proud of the fact that it occupies a kind of dark corner of television history, that some people still remember, and often people that are in the genre, I'm recently I've met, really best-selling horror authors from the States who, are quite gobsmacked when they come across it. And what, people like, Grady Hendrix or Josh Malerman, who've got best-selling books out there, and they discover Ghostwatch, and it's like their jaws hit the floor. They can't believe it ever happened. It probably wouldn't happen in the States because they wouldn't allow it on public broadcasting. But the wonderful thing is that at least the BBC did it. That's what Parkinson said. At least the BBC did it, even though they then chose to bury it. But at least they did it. But But it was a very proud moment when I went to BAFTA once, and they've got around the walls of BAFTA, they've got a kind of timeline of television history. And I looked at 1992, and one of the things it mentioned was Ghostwatch. So there it is, etched on the wall of BAFTA as a bit of TV history.
And finally, where can people find you online?
You can find me on Facebook. I've been X for, I don't need to explain why. This just became I got too tired of being called a libtard. So I came off Twitter, as I still insist on calling it. But I'm on Facebook for the time being. But you can look at my website, which is stephenvolk.net, or contact me on Facebook is probably the best.
I think that's where I contacted you, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Will they be able to meet you in person anywhere this year?
Oh. No, you see, I'm doing what you're talking about. I was visualizing someone like my number one fan kind of coming around the corner and finding me, But, I don't know what I don't know whether I'm going to go to FantasyCon, because it depends on the dates later in the year. Sometimes I go to Manchester for the Festival of Fantastic Films, which is a great event of very nice people who just get together, and there are excellent guests there. I think that's in September or October, I can't remember. So I might go to that. But I've come a bit kind of wary of large crowds in conventions. I don't, since COVID, I think I've just kind of got not germ phobic or anything like that, but just the idea of mixing with hundreds of people for 2 or 3 days doesn't appeal to me that much at the moment. But I might. So I don't have great plans at the moment, but I might see you somewhere, as they say.
Well, thank you very much for talking to me. It's been brilliant.
Pleasure.
And for everyone that's listening, we'll see you next time on the podcast.
Bye.
There are stories galore in volumes by the score on every subject throughout history.